Horror films are unique in their ability to draw in an audience and create tension. Since the first horror movie in 1896, the techniques used to develop fear have evolved tremendously. From better cameras to better editing, a lot has changed since the 1800s. When you look at a list of all of the horror films, most of them are recycled jump scares and shock value films. However, the few that truly take advantage of film techniques really do shine. Whether you're a horror fanatic or a horror phobic, get ready, because today we're going to be looking at how techniques from one of the most legendary horror films of all time, The Shining, can be found everywhere in modern films like Get Out. When I was watching Get Out, one scene in particular stood out to me. The writing, camera angles, sound, editing. The scene when Chris discovers Rose's past relationships is fantastic. The scene actually reminded me of a Pablo Picasso quote, "Good artists borrow, great artists steal," because that scene is shot for shot exactly the same as when Wendy finds Jack's papers. Before I start comparing these, it is a horror film, so of course it's going to have rising tones and tension-building music. But because you can find that similarity in any two movies, I'm going to focus on three key similarities that are more clearly inspired by The Shining. The first similarity is in the camera angles. The very first shots of the scene, we have a low angle shot where we can't see what the character is looking at, but we can see their reaction. For The Shining, the camera's behind the typewriter, and we can see Wendy slowly walking towards it. And for Get Out, the camera is in the closet cubby thing, and we can see Chris approach the unknown item inside the closet. Choices like going with a slower reveal and not immediately showing the viewer what the character sees are what set The Shining up to be such a good movie. This is something a lot of horror movies get wrong, where instead of building tension slowly, they go for shock value. The issue with this is the reason starting a scene with a low angle shot like this is so powerful is it keeps the viewer tense, creates a greater sense of fear, and holds that fear for longer. In both The Shining and Get Out, tension is built for the entire first hour of the film, all the way until the first true scare. Keeping tension in the viewer's mind like this is what makes a horror movie good, because even in scenes that aren't scary at all, the viewer is tense and on the edge of their seat. The second similarity between these scenes in Get Out and The Shining is the way framing is used to emphasize the subject of the scene. As both Wendy and Chris are having their moment of realization, the shots of the photos and the pages are extremely tight. The purpose of these shots is to completely isolate every other detail that's happening and force the viewer to focus on the subject. In both Get Out and The Shining, you have these super tense scenes, with all the emotion and plot leading up to it, but at the very fundamentals of these shots, they're simple. Rather than try to put scary things like candles around the boxes or signal to the viewer that this is scary, the simplicity of only showing the object makes that object even scarier. The third similarity is in the editing of the scene. As Chris is flipping through the photos, the shot cuts between the photos and Chris looking at the photos. This switch of perspective in the middle of a high-tension scene is phenomenal, because it allows the viewer to see both the reaction of the character and what they're reacting to. We can find this exact type of editing in The Shining. As Wendy's flipping through the pages, the perspective of the camera is changed from the typewriter's perspective back to Wendy's perspective, and then from the box's perspective back to Wendy's perspective. The genius behind this editing is allowing the viewer to build more and more tension as the scene progresses. By opening the sequence from the perspective of either the box or typewriter, the viewer has to imagine what is making the character so scared. And as the scene progresses, the viewer becomes more scared of the object, in this case, pages and pictures, but also is reminded that the main character is scared too. Through a combination of our own fear and empathy for the character, this editing creates an extreme amount of tension. One interesting difference between these two scenes is in Get Out they opt for quicker cuts back and forth, while The Shining holds the shots for a bit longer. The effectiveness of the technique doesn't change much, but it shows how there are multiple ways to use each technique. Since 1896, things have changed a lot, but because of the way movies can share techniques and build on each other, they've changed for the better. There will always be movies that pioneer new techniques and prove doubters wrong, but part of what makes a movie like The Shining so great is the impact it had on horror movies as a whole. I only talked about Get Out, but any good horror movie will have some aspect of The Shining in it. I only talked about camera angles, framing, editing, but in every aspect of film, you can find a similarity between Get Out and The Shining. In my opinion, the ecosystem of techniques benefits the horror movie scene as a whole, making our lives a little scarier and a lot more interesting.